Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. This week I am talking with James. He has a lot of great things to say about intimacy choreography. I am dividing this into more than one episode. I don't know if it'll be 2 or 3 yet, because we do talk for a little bit. In this first one, we talk about kind of the basics of working on consent and intimacy with stage partners and whatnot, just because intimacy choreography is a fairly new thing, which is crazy to think about, but it's fairly new. So I wanted this first episode to be kind of laying groundwork for if, people haven't been able to work with an intimacy choreographer or intimacy director, how, we can approach consensual language and all of that fun stuff. So I hope you guys enjoy. So everyone, this is James.
Hi everyone, I'm James.
And he and I met working on Sense and Sensibility at Lyric Arts together.
Yeah.
And he has been training to do intimacy choreography.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of take a deep dive. Not a lot of people, I feel like intimacy choreography is something that's like very new.
Yes.
Which is awesome that it is now becoming an actual thing. And we have an intimacy choreographer for Traviata, which I'm doing right now. But I still feel like there are a lot of companies that can't afford to have intimacy choreographers working for them.
Yeah.
So I wanted this episode to be kind of an opportunity for you to kind of talk about your training and like your understanding of intimacy choreography and kind of be able to lay down some of the things that you talked about during Sense and Sensibility, like kind of like a brief overview of like how you can talk to each other, when you're actors and you're in this world of like, everything's fine, yes, and everything is fine, and how you're not a lesser performer if you're not okay with being touched a certain way.
Right. It's like any other job that you're doing. Like, it's your work, it's your job. You deserve to be like safe and comfortable and secure in the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, with all of that being said, I just want, so how did you get involved with doing intimacy choreography?
So I started with Theater Unbound was hosting Siobhan Richardson, who is one of the founders of Intimacy Directors International, and that's the organization that I've been training with. teamidi.org. IDI is sort of like the leading organization at doing this. A bunch of different people had sort of disparately been coming up with these techniques and training and researching it and doing all of this stuff, and then Siobhan is based out of Toronto, and then Alicia Rodas, I believe, is based out of New York, and Tonya Sina is based in Chicago. And Tonya had been she worked in academia and had been doing research on intimacy work and consent work. That was like the academic work she was doing, and then she started this and then kind of teamed up with Siobhan and Alicia, and they were all like, hey, we're all kind of doing this work, maybe we can be stronger together, and we started doing this. So local theater company, Theater Unbound, brought Siobhan to Minneapolis to teach like a 3-hour workshop. And a friend of mine had said, hey, I know that you're interested in other movement work and other stuff like that, and this is going on. If you're interested, you should go. So I went to that, and I had 3 hours with Siobhan, and I was like, well, this is the best thing there is. Once you know about it, you can't go back. You know what I mean?
Unknown.
Right.
Yes.
Once you know that there's a different way to do this work in a way that's safe and comfortable and respectful and consensual, you're like, oh, why? Literally, why would I ever do not this?
Exactly.
So I did that. I did this 3-hour workshop, and then this past January, I went to Chicago for a 3-day workshop with Tonya and Claire Warden, who's one of the... Claire was heading up Theatrical Intimacy UK. She's based in London. And then she started getting involved, and now she's one of their intimacy directors and choreographers and coordinators and one of their lead instructors. And now they've kind of like grouped that together, I believe, that it's now like Theatrical Intimacy UK is now like they joined with Intimacy Directors International to be like the UK branch, but now they're like one organization, right? So I did like a 3-day workshop. The more you learn about it, the more you're like, oh, there's so much I don't know.
The more you need to learn.
I know some things.
You know more than a lot of people, though.
Yes.
I mean, you taught me things. Like, there were, like, you know, the fact that, like, you could, like, that a director can give permission, we can go into this, but, like, that someone can give you permission, but only you can give consent. Like, that whole idea, like, you know, a lot of actors and performers grow up in this world where, you know, the director tells you to do something and you do it.
Yeah.
And you don't really, I mean, yeah, we're not like robots. Like, we can think of, like, you know, whatever. But it's this, and even growing up, like, you know, doing high school theater, it's like everyone is really like, it's like that stereotype of like the theater kid, like they're all giving each other back massage. I mean, I totally did that in high school. And like, not everyone who is in theater wants to be touched in a certain way, you know? So,
or they might like being touched in that certain way in a consensual environment in which that, you know, and that doesn't need to carry over into like, I mean, that's sort of like the boundary, right, between like theater and acting being like your job as opposed to being like your personhood.
Yes.
And like nobody should be harassed at work.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about consent, permission, and those kind of like basic things that that an intimacy choreographer would say on like the first day of rehearsal or whatever. If you didn't have an intimacy choreographer, something that you could like say to those people who maybe haven't experienced that.
Sure. So there's like the 5 pillars, like Intimacy Directors International has these 5 pillars of like intimacy work, and they all start with C. It's very alliterative. I love it. And so it's like communication, context, consent, choreography, and closure. And so it's all about like communication, making sure that like everybody's one, and these are all like they're so simple and so obvious, right? Like when I feel like when I'm talking about them, I'm like, cause duh.
Right.
But actually like so many people are like, oh, I've never like that's never been articulated to them.
Yeah.
Or people haven't been following those rules, but like they're rules that we follow like in everyday life, but then when it comes to theater, we're like,
well, yeah, because again, a director will say like, do this. Yeah. And you're just like, okay. You know, you don't really, you don't feel like you can stop and ask, is that okay with you?
Right.
Even though you totally, again, that takes like 5 seconds. You totally can, but you just don't think, you think that everyone is just like on board with X, Y, and Z.
So we talk about like communication, one, just like, we're all here, this is what we're doing. And the context piece being like, what is the story that we're telling to make sure that you understand? Because the story could be totally different. Like if the stage direction is just like, they kiss. It's like, well, what does that mean? Is this like a passionate kiss? Or is this a peck on the cheek? Is this a peck on the lips? Like what
kind of kiss is
this? And we can't just like leave the actors up to decide that, which unfortunately is like what happens a lot of times, which is bad. And then the consent piece, right? So the consent versus permission. So the IDI, they follow actually Planned Parenthood's like definition of consent.
Oh, that's great.
Which is the Fry's model. It's freely given, retractable, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So consent being like it's freely given, so you can't do it under duress or under pressure. To, you know, retractable, like just because you consent to do this stage kiss in this scene does not mean you consent to do the same thing 2 scenes later, or tomorrow, or later that day, right? That you can consent to it in this moment and then say no later. And then informed, you have to know exactly what's going on. So when you just say, well, they kiss, okay, so you two kiss. It's like, okay, well, how long are we kissing? With what intensity? With what, you know, what body parts are touching? Like all of that stuff, right? And it has to be enthusiastic. So one of the things they were training us as intimacy choreographers was like, if I ask an actor, here's a blueprint, you're going to step up, you're going to place your hand on his back, he's going to place his hand on your head, and then you are going to kiss on the lips. And if I'm like, is that okay? Are we okay with that? And one of the scene partners says, great, sounds awesome, like totally there for it. And the other is like, sure, like that's a no.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where that sort of enthusiastic, like they need to actually want to do it and not just feel like because they're expected to, right?
Exactly.
And then specific, just again, like with the choreography piece. So the piece of consent versus permission being, you said it wonderfully.
Oh, thank you.
So good.
I'm learning.
Of like, someone can give you permission to do something, but you are the only person who can consent to do it. So a director can give two actors permission to, oh yeah, if you're really feeling it in this moment and there's and you want to throw a kiss in there, totally good, like that'll fit in the scene, great. So the director gives you permission to make that happen, but then only those two actors can consent to actually do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good line of distinction of like, just because the director told you to doesn't mean you have to, and doesn't mean you consent to it. And just because, like, if a director told you, Anna, it's okay for you to kiss James, and you're like, okay, great, awesome, I'm totally game for it. Like, I also still have consent in that situation, right?
Yeah,
so even though I'm the one being acted upon, like, there's multiple people involved in this.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we follow that model. So then, if like the rest of the C's, like then choreography is like making it specific and repeatable, so that the actors know exactly what's going on, and that's going to happen exactly the same every single night. The same way that your fight choreography or your dance choreography would be. Yeah. It is exactly the same every night. And then closure being a little bit what we were talking about earlier of like the difference between like, this is me at work, and this is my job, and this is what I do at my job, and this is what I do in my life and as a person. Yeah. And that having closure to really separate the lines between, this was the two of us interacting as these characters on stage at work, and now there's a separate us that interacts just like as people on the street. Right. And just because our characters fall in love with each other doesn't mean that carries over into real life. And so making sure, and that's like a pretty blah example. That's like a pretty standard example. It could be things like, if your intimacy is, if you have like a really intense domestic violence rape scene that's happening, and having closure to separate for those actors to be like, hey, I was, if I were the abuser in that, as that character in that situation, and because your bodies physiologically go through that trauma while that's happening, and so if you don't have closure at the end of that and know how to like check in and check out of that, it's really easy to like let that overflow into your life. Yeah, definitely. So where can people find you? Oh my God. Give them your address. No. I like don't use social media. That's fine. So what project are you doing next? Good question. Yeah. Oh my God, so good. So I'm choreographing and intimacy choreographing for Carrie the Musical at Children's Theater for their high school summer. Oh, their summer. I did Assassins with them. Oh, like fun. When I was in high school. Yeah. So I'm doing that, cool. And then I'm choreographing Little Shop of Horrors at Chanhassen High School later. Ooh, exciting! That's awesome. So that's where you can find him. Yeah. Well, I think you can find me at James F. Kunz on X. Great. I'm so terrible. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. We'll hear more from James in the coming weeks. I'm sorry I had to cut it short and divide this episode. But stay tuned and you'll hear more from James, and have a great week.